Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Literature Channel. I'm Tim Wilson. I'm a professor of English literature at the University of Ottawa in Canada. On this channel, we delve into English literature in particular, but also the great books in the Western canon. And one such example is Thus Spoke Zarathustra by the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. I want to do a series of lectures where we go through section by section that amazing work, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And this would serve as an introduction to the book as a whole. So if you're on a short introduction to the book, this is the video. But also a good introduction, let's say, to the work as we go through in a more detailed fashion, section by section. The the theme of this entryway into Nietzsche's work that I've selected is let's look at the whole structure, the structure of the book itself, so we have a sense of the work as a whole, and particularly in the way in which it's a reversal of Platonism and in particular a reversal of Plato's Republic. So let's get started. For Nietzsche, Zarathustra was his most important work, but it's also his most enigmatic. It's something that readers have struggled with for generations since he wrote it, and it combines philosophy, poetry, myth. So it's difficult to sum up. And the titular character, Zarathustra, is a fictional prophet character, loosely based on the Asian Persian figure Zoroaster, and he retreats from humanity in the overall story. He re-engages with humanity to share his insights from his, let's say, prophetic philosophic retreat. But then, he finally retreats again, and in this pattern of ascent and descent. So it was published in 1883 to 1885, kind of the 1880s, really the peak of the high point of Nietzsche's philosophic activity. So the point of departure of the work is the need for a new meaning for humanity in the wake of the death of God. Um, the death of God is announced actually by Nietzsche in the work that preceded the publication of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, The Gay Science. And interestingly enough, the end of that work, the last section, it repeats the first section of Zarathustra. The two books point to one another, and the problematic of the death of God and what that means for humanity. Death of God, the death of truth, the death of our highest values, our notion of what makes things what they are, what makes us what we are. In that wake, humanity is adrift and we need to find new meaning. So there's a need for a new teaching that will allow humanity to overcome the nihilism that accompanies this death of God. And then I'll just point out that the subtitle of the work is A Book for All and None. So all of us, all humanity are in need of this new teaching, but few or none are ready to hear the new teaching. That'd be one way of interpreting, let's say, the the subtitle, A Book for All and None. I think there are others as we go through. So the roots of nihilism, that's the problem. The problem, the point of departure, the death of God, nihilism. The roots of nihilism for Nietzsche lie in Platonism and Christianity, which Nietzsche called the latter, he called Platonism for the people. So the new teaching needs to overcome Platonism is let's say a way of making that correlation. So interestingly, earlier on, early in his career, 1870, 71, Nietzsche referred to his own philosophy as, quote, inverting Platonism, the further away from true being, the more pure, beautiful, better it is. So we can see this reversal of Plato happening in the very structure, and this is the point of departure, our point of entry into the work. We see this reversal of Plato happening in the structure of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. So Zarathustra as a character is presented as an advancement upon and a reversal of the model of the philosopher ruler described in Plato's Republic. So Nietzsche's book opens with the following sentence. When Zarathustra was 30 years old, he left his home and the lake of his home and went into the mountains. So when we first encounter Zarathustra, he's in a cave in a mountain. We could say, so he's at a high point as opposed to, let's say, uh, underneath the earth as the philosophers are in begin their point of departure in the allegory of the cave in the Republic. We could say that Zarathustra left the familiarity of his surroundings and what passed for true and false there to make an ascent. That would be, let's say, akin to the philosophers in the allegory of the cave. Whereas the philosopher rulers make an ascent out of a cave, Zarathustra's ascent is to a cave, so to speak. So if we look at the structure of Plato's Republic, we see Socrates talk about beginning with, in terms of the narrative, uh, the dramatic action of the dialogue. He's recounting how he went down yesterday to the Piraeus. So he descended to the Piraeus. There's mythical evocations of Odysseus's descent into the underworld, and they begin to talk about justice, and he wants to look at justice writ large. So they in the city, so they say, okay, well, let's try to construct a city in speech that would really embody justice. And so they begin through books 2 to 4 to construct this just city in speech. So we have an ascent of sorts in speech. Um, and then the peak of the work as a whole is this dialogue around the philosopher, what constitutes the philosopher who would be the ruler of this city in speech. And we have the famous similes of the sun, of the line, the divided line, and the allegory of the cave. I won't go into those here. We'll have other lectures on Plato's Republic. But after that, we have a descent. We have the destruction of the just city through successive um, degradations of that ideal city. And we end with the myth of a literal descent into the underworld again. So we have this pattern, first pointed out by Eric Vogelin, of of descent and ascent, descent to the underworld and ascending out. We could say that the structure of thus spoke Zarathustra is an inversion of that. We begin on a mountain in a cave, but on a mountain, we have a couple of times in Zarathustra's action a descent to the many, or at least to a few, beginning with the many in the town, where he announces the idea of the overman and the last man. Um, and then this city, the Motley Cow, and the great city in book 5 or part 5, part 3, and finally an ascent at the end of part 3 to back to his cave, where he awaits the moment to return with his new teaching of the eternal return. Um, so the structure of Nietzsche's work um, has a bearing on how we interpret the overall teaching of the work. Um, Zarathustra is his only dramatic work, and this is a very key point to underscore. A lot of people want to cherry pick quotes from Nietzsche, and there'll be an aphorism from most of the works you can kind of pick out, and they're on their own, and maybe they stand alone. Um, it and then you'll see people cherry pick quotes from Zarathustra. Zarathustra, unlike those other aphoristic works, is a dramatic whole. So Zarathustra, what he says at the beginning, that evolves, and he as a character evolves, and his teaching evolves. So what may stand in part 1 is not necessarily what stands as the overall teaching. Um, that dramatic context of the unfolding of the story is important, as it is in Plato's Republic, or as it is in any literary work. The teachings of part one. Oh, sorry, I'll just back up on the dramatic, understanding the dramatic aspect of the work. I think um, Gadamer has an essay called "The Drama of Zarathustra," and was maybe the first to really pick this up. Laurence Lampert's whole work called Nietzsche's Teaching is an excellent, probably the best single work on Zarathustra, an excellent unpacking of this, let's say, the action and the dramatic aspect of Nietzsche's work. Um, I do get a lot of insights from Lampert. I differ with Lampert in terms of the interpretation of the significance of his reversal of Plato and how he reverses Plato's esoteric mode of communication. And as we go through the detailed sections of part one of Zarathustra in future videos, will become more clear, my difference from Lampert. Um, so the teachings of part one on the Overman could be seen as surpassed in later teachings in the work. So the Overman implies a linear existence with elements of one's past or present that can be overcome, and this ends up being seen in part two as it embodying kind of a spirit of revenge, and that element of resenting one's past, one has to overcome that as well. And ultimately, we have with the teaching of the eternal return of the same, a different relationship to one's past, as opposed to something that we just leap over and forget. It's something that needs to be embraced. So to return to that in a bit more detail, uh, in the prologue, when Zarathustra goes to the many in the town, he's teaching to an all, so to speak, in a marketplace, and he teaches them about the overman and the last man. And the last man can be seen as humanity in its fallen aspects, as the crowd, as the we, as merely a function of public opinion and social conditions. And this fallen aspect of humanity is an essential aspect of our condition, but that which in this teaching, something we need to leap beyond in order to be able to create, in order to be able to become individuals. So to this all, he teaches the overman is that which overcomes humanity in its fallen aspects in order to create new possibilities. And he contrasts it with, because at first they're not hearing this message, he contrasts that with this notion of the last man, which is this product of Enlightenment rationality and liberal democracy, where everyone is the same. They're this kind of herd animal wanting only convenience and not striving for greatness or distinction. So this, again, reminder, this teaching to the marketplace of the overman occurs early in Zarathustra's development. It's still the prologue before the ultimately four parts of Zarathustra as a whole. After he's ridiculed by those in the market, he realizes he must teach to a few. He must select some disciples. He must find disciples in book one and two. Book one and two consist of him selecting the disciples and teaching to these disciples. So some quotes from the prologue. Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. What can be loved in man is that he is an overture and a going under. I say unto you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. I say unto you, you still have chaos in yourselves. Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer give birth to a star. Alas, the time of the most despicable man is coming, he that is no longer able to despise himself. Behold, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? Thus asks the last man, and he blinks. So he's blinking. He's a bunch of herd or cows out there, basically. The earth has become smaller, and on it hops the last man who makes everything small. His race is is as ineradicable as the flea beetle. The last man lives longest. We have invented happiness, say the last men, and they blink. So a contrast between this notion of needing to be or needing to achieve an overcoming of humanity, the overman, contrast between that and the stultified complacence of the last man of modernity. We're satisfied with mere convenience of inventing a new machine that allows us to have quicker downloads on our phone or something like that, because that's going to improve our convenience as opposed to striving for something higher. So this is the teaching of book one, and this teaching to the marketplace of the overman. It occurs early in the development, in the prologue, and then after he's ridiculed by the market, he realizes I need to teach to the few and find disciples. So in book two, he ends up teaching the concept of the will to power, and the overman's not returned to. The will to power is what he teaches to the few. And then book three, he teaches this concept of the eternal return to none. He discovers it alone. So what is the will to power? If we start there, will to power is this fundamental nature of all existence. So the complex configuration of forces and drives that seek to impress their perspective on their surroundings. That he thinks of as the will to power. Existence itself is will to power, a function of different forces trying to impress their dominant direction, their force, on a configuration. So we can see that in every level of existence, from physical properties of things to social and ideational configurations in society. So, for instance, religious and philosophical systems are examples of configurations of the will to power manifesting themselves as systems of thinking or systems of social organization. Platonism was a particular configuration of weak will seeking an otherworldly justification of existence. Political social structures, example, nationalism, he felt was a product of a declining wills, falsifying their identity to find meaning. Artistic forms, so Greek tragedy was an expression of affirmative wills, a will embracing this existence, not trying to deny this existence and find justification in an other world. Greek tragedy was an artistic uh, expression of an active will to power. So he calls for, in his philosophy of will to power, a revaluation of all values that understands the all things and as expressions of either life affirming, life enhancing wills or life denying negative wills. So he, religious and philosophical systems, political, social structure, artistic forms are not to be understood as true or false or good or bad, but rather are they expressions of something that enhances life or denies life? And in the Antichrist, a later work, Nietzsche interpreted early Judaism, for instance, as a product of life enhancing affirmative will to power. And that later degenerated into, through different priestly traditions, a more life denying negative configuration of will to power. So that's basically the teaching of the second part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the will to power, and we get some the ways I was describing will to power, how we can understand the will to power are not fully articulated in the second part. We get some of that from Nietzsche's later works, as I pointed out, the Antichrist, his notebooks, The Will to Power, Beyond Good and Evil, Genealogy of Morals. These are all very useful for trying to unpack that concept of the will to power. But then that's not, again, still where the work ends, where we kind of see the ultimate teaching in the third part and the fourth part of Zarathustra, which is the fourth part, kind of an interlude as he waits to return with this new teaching. Um, we have the teaching of the eternal return of the same. For Nietzsche, this is the highest form of affirmation. In his work Ecce Homo, he has a section where he reflects on all of his books, and when he gets to Zarathustra, he says this is the fundamental concept of thus spoke Zarathustra is the eternal return of the same, and it's this highest concept of affirmation, the highest expression of the will to power. So if you're an affirming, if 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 we're looking for philosophical or organizational societal manifestations of a life affirming will, the affirmation of the eternal return is the highest form of affirmation. So it's the highest manifestation of the will to power. And this is the way in which, let's say, the will to power and the eternal return, there is a belonging together of these two concepts as fundamentally united in Nietzsche's thinking. So a way I try to think about the eternal return is we usually kind of think about our day-to-day existence as well. We think of it, I think, predominantly in a linear fashion. We think, okay, well, I'm having a painful moment right now. Maybe I've got to get through some tough work, and that's my painful experience right now. Let's say moment A in this right-hand figure. Oh, and we think, well, I'll get over it, and in the future there'll be a moment B where that's gone, and that'll be a joyful experience. In the eternal return of the same, we don't have this linear notion of existence. We have moment A being painful, being intimately united with the joyful experience on the other side of the equation. The two belong together in the whole. So we often kind of think, as I say here, everything's going to be all right when I graduate. I'm going through some tough times now. I'm looking forward to what's going to give this meaning. This work will only have meaning in something beyond it. Everything will be all right when my student loans are paid off, we think. Um, all of these take the form of everything will be all right when I reach an endpoint that is beyond this moment, when this middle period of suffering is over. So Nietzsche's joyful news, I think his teaching of the eternal return is everything's all right now. Um, there is only the now and what you make of it in terms of affirming this moment as tied to that future meaning you think it's going to have once you transcend it. So, so I think in a nutshell, that would be one way, my way of explaining the eternal return of the same and why for Nietzsche, it's the highest form of affirmation. So the way out of the crisis of nihilism is the way through nihilism. It's by means of completing nihilism that we take it to its ultimate conclusions and embrace its consequences, that will be liberated of the crushing and paralyzing effects of nihilism, the paralysis of action and thought arising from nihilism's notion that human willed activity has no value. So the way out of nihilism is by affirming the eternal return of the small. Like we have to affirm the eternal return of the small. Now, I want to return to the slide where we saw this figure on the right. So this is why we can say, if we look at the figure on the right, the we have in the structure of Zarathustra the a key to how we have a reversal of Platonism. Instead of the movement of ascent and descent, we have this descent and ascent. Instead of moving uh, to from few to the philosopher alone, and then returning to the many, we go from the all or the many in part one to the few and the none at the end. And we see how in part three we have something pointing back to the prologue. We have in part three fact that he's alone again in the cave points us again to where we began. The structure is a circular structure in a way that affirms what the ultimate teaching is, the eternal return of the same. It thinking about the structure points to the reversal of Platonism and the overcoming of nihilism, but also points to eternal return as the mode of overcoming nihilism. So just to make that point explicit, when we begin, we're in the prologue at the beginning. He's alone. He's on a mountain. He goes to the many in the town. In part one, he's in motley cow, but he's selecting disciples. He's selecting a few. In part two, he teaches the will to power to that few. In part three, we have a return to the situation of the prologue. He returns to his cave ultimately in part three. He has his realization of the truth of the eternal return alone in his cave with his animals. And we point again to the prologue, which begins the entire work. So there you have it, an introduction to the work as a whole, its teachings from the Overman, will to power, and the eternal return. Through the lens of the structure, understand the structure, the dramatic action of his descent and ascent back to his cave, and how the structure as circular um, points to the ultimate teaching of the eternal return. So I hope that was useful. As I said, I'll be following up with particular videos on each section of Zarathustra, and we'll start with the prologue. Thank you very much.